Welcome in, welcome in. This is another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. This is a Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show edition. I'm your host, Benjamin Wolk, here with Jordan Hill to take a line from our guy, Josh Pate. I've got a jam-packed show for you here talking Georgia recruiting. It is that time of year. We'll have Junior Day recap talking about the February 1st recruiting weekend that Georgia had. We'll talk a little bit about what's next from a recruiting standpoint, what you can kind of expect from the calendar and moving forward. The traditional 2025 signing class was this past weekend, this past week. And so we'll talk about the 2025 class, sort of tie a bow on that. But the bulk of the show will be an interview with our 24/7 Sports National Director of Scouting, Andrew Ivins. I think that's going to be a super informative, helpful conversation for everybody in the Georgia world to understand his process and more about the 2025 and 2026 recruiting class. Of course, we will predict a commit. We'll have arrow pointing up. We'll have a look ahead to what's moving forward. But I think we got to start with Junior Day. Jordan, before I get into anything in particular, was there anything from Junior Day that you were super curious about given our conversations that we had last week?
I think the biggest thing is just sort of what the atmosphere was going to be like for these recruits, because you pointed this out when we were leading up to this past weekend. They like to center these junior days around basketball. And, I think that Auburn game was the first one where they had the junior day, and it worked out where really entertaining game opportunity for a lot of those recruits to spend time with Kirby Smart, with Glenn Schumann, with people throughout this coaching staff. But yeah, just sort of learning what was going on, what some of the messages and what the recruits were hearing from guys. I think that was the biggest thing for me.
That's probably a good topic to touch on. I wasn't planning on talking about it, but just like what goes on these junior days, like all these various trips are different. And to your point, they do typically like to structure it around a big basketball weekend because you get around the fans, you can just have some more, student athlete environment type of experiences that are laid back, which is what they did for the first junior day. For this junior day, I think that the focus really is they get to campus and they break down into offensive and defensive meeting rooms. And from my understanding, every single offensive coach or defensive coach, depending on what room you're in, they have their own walkout songs where they're introducing all of the various coaches. They're letting them know what position they coach specifically, what their role is on the team. If they recruit a certain area, they might indicate that as well. And then they really break down what Georgia is schematically. I mean, if you're talking to offensive players, they are talking about Georgia's pro style offense. And I know that this past weekend they had a Super Bowl theme that they went with, and they were comparing the offense's pro style approach and the way that they scheme up plays on offense, personnel groupings, those types of things. They were comparing it to both the Chiefs and the Eagles. So definitely trying to tie things that would be situationally relevant for guys. Same on the defensive side. And then a really big portion of the day is everyone having their scheduled one-on-one meetings with either position coaches or Kirby Smart. And a lot of times that's going to be film breakdown, answering questions that you might have. And then in many cases, looking ahead and scheduling what the next big visits are going to be. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into as we talk about Junior Day recap. And what I consider to be the most important part of this is not just what happens at Junior Day. Did you like your visit? If you read a lot of my articles, it's going to be like, yeah, my visit went great. I did X, Y, and Z. And like those things are going to be pretty standard this type of year. But it's really who is scheduling official visits for the summer. Because if you were coming on a Junior Day visit and you were leaving with an official visit scheduled, there's a lot of mutual interest there. It's something that everybody wanted to get on the books and get finalized. And so I wanted to call out a few names. We're not going to get into every single person that visited for this Junior Day. You can certainly go to Dogs 24/7, and I have a full notebook coming from the weekend. I have articles coming out of that as well. There will be plenty more where that comes from. Just today, I had an update on a former Kirby Smart player's younger brother that's going to be taking an official visit to Georgia. So there's a lot of inside intel type of stuff in there. But people that I wanted to talk about that have official visits scheduled coming out of Junior Day, there's really 6 names that I wanted to hone in on. One, Carter Scruggs, he's an offensive lineman, interior offensive lineman, but probably has the flexibility to play tackle. He's going to take an official visit the weekend of June 20th. I want to say, I apologize. Another Carter. So the first two that we're going to start out with, Carter Scruggs. We've also got Carter Lucky. That's a name that everybody's going to be familiar with. He's going to be officially visiting Georgia that first weekend of May/June. I think it's May 30th to June 1st. He's someone that Georgia has had tucked away for a long time. Someone from out of state, from the West Coast, Narbonne, California, Kenneth Goodwin, someone that I met at the Future 50 in the middle of last year. Someone that has a lot of West Coast ties to Georgia. I know that he goes back with an off-the-field staffer, David Hill, from a long, long time ago. He has an official visit scheduled to Georgia. Anytime Georgia has taken a look at a national landscape linebacker, we're always going to take close notice because Glenn Schumann has a great track record of landing those guys. I got a pronunciation guide for you here. We have the number, we talked about him a little bit already, the number 3 safety out of Maryland, Jara Edwards. It's spelled Jireh. It's pronounced Jara. He has an official visit scheduled with Georgia. I know that he was also grabbing a bite to eat with some Georgia coaches, as well as Javari Flowers, who's the 2025 reclass. They were doing some of that on Saturday night, so he got a little bit of extra time afterwards with Georgia coaches as well. Sticking on the defensive back side of things, and I think that we've talked a lot. This is an important class for Georgia at defensive back. Caden Harris from just outside of the Memphis area, he has an official visit scheduled for June 6th. And then Jordan Smith from Houston County, he only has one official visit scheduled right now, and that is to Georgia, and that's that first weekend, May 30th to June 1st. Those are all 6 guys that I would imagine are sort of in the conversation for your predicted commit. They're sort of in the conversation for my predicted commit. I think anytime that there is this mutual interest to get something on the books months and months in advance, there's a lot of intrigue there. Out of those 6 guys, Jordan, anyone stick out to you?
I think the biggest thing is more so the defensive back position. It's like when you look, and especially like I've been really trying to do my homework, been on working on the predicted commits, trying to get the guys, trying to read the tea leaves, but I don't have a great feel for who kind of stands out among the defensive backs. So it's kind of not so much what we hear out of this weekend, but sort of following what some of these guys do in the next few months. Does it become clear that Georgia's a leader for any of these guys? Some of these other positions we've talked about, I feel like I kind of have a decent feel for some of it, but and you can speak on it because you have a better feel for it than I do. What do you make about this group of defensive backs? And you don't, have to show your hand with any predicted commits, but do you feel like it's as wide open as far as defensive backs go as I'm kind of reading it right now?
I completely agree, and I'll say I think Georgia defensive back coaches are trying to keep this a little bit close to their vest in terms of who their top priorities are. I think they understand how important of a cycle this is. I mean, even Zach Fort, I know that we had it included in last episode, and we had some forecasting of it earlier in the show and then got to talk about the breaking news later on in the show. But even that was something that came a little bit out of left field in the 24, 48 hours prior to him actually announcing things. And so, yeah, Jara Edwards, Caden Harris, Jordan Smith, another guy that was on, Tyreek Green, Nasir McCoy. Nasir McCoy didn't end up being able to make the trip out of Buford, but Tyreek Green, a safety from Buford that I think is definitely going to be in the conversation. Tony Forney, an in-state guy that I think is going to be in the conversation. And so there were a lot of those types of high intrigue defensive backs that were on campus for this February 1st junior day. I'll add another one to that list, just kind of getting into the topic of players that intrigue me that don't have official visits with Georgia scheduled yet, but I think probably will at some point. And I just find the way that these recruitments play out to be fascinating. And I'll start at defensive back as well. Peyton Dyer, he's committed to South Carolina right now from Duluth High School. He's one of the most talented players in the state of Georgia. I mean, he's someone that I am putting my stamp on, that I believe in as a really top talent player in this class in the Peach State. He said to me, Kirby Smart is going to take a hands-on approach in his recruitment, and he understands that not everybody is getting that level of treatment from the head coach anywhere, but especially at Georgia. He only has one official visit scheduled right now, and that is to South Carolina, which is where he's committed. But I would be shocked if Georgia doesn't find a way to get on his calendar this summer as well. The same can be said for linebacker Braden Rouse. We've talked in the past about how his chemistry teacher is Kirby Smart's sister. There are family connections to Braden Rouse with Georgia that nobody else is going to be able to match. Now, I don't think that's going to be the deciding factor because right now he has one official visit scheduled, and that's to Tennessee. And I think that anytime you've got guys, I said it with Jordan Smith, he only has one official visit scheduled, and it's to Georgia. That should make you feel pretty good about Georgia standing there. I think the same can be said about Tennessee and Braden Rouse right now. And it's early. There's still spring practices that everyone's going to go on. There's still these official visits that everyone's going to take that can always change everything. But I would put Tennessee as the front runner for Braden Rouse right now. I think that they were earlier than most. I think that they have shown more attention than most. This recruitment reminds me an awful lot of Christian Gass's from a cycle ago, where Tennessee just seemed like they were in front of everybody else, and it was going to take a lot for them to relinquish that. I expect Georgia to get an official visit scheduled. Make no mistake there. But I do put Tennessee in the driver's seat in that one, and I think that that's an important spot for Tennessee.
I don't want to show my hand too much for predict to commit later, but I swear to you, Ben, I was looking at Rouse and then looking at his situation and what you just laid out. I was like, I'm getting real Christian Gas vibes just from the setup. And like you said, this is a long way from being decided, but not to totally tip my hand, but not picking Rouse this time because those comparisons you said. Tennessee seems like they did a very good job evaluating and identifying him, and I think they're in a really good spot as we sit here in February.
And my comparisons go beyond just the way this recruitment is unfolding, even though that definitely plays a role in it. Christian Gas was someone I saw last January. I met him for the first time, and I said, man, he pops. Like his length, his athleticism, it screams at you, the way that he carries himself. I've known Braden Rouse a little bit longer just because I've been exposed to Cal High School more than I had been to East Side. Braden Rouse is the same way. I mean, he is composed, and you feel like you are in front of an SEC, all SEC type of linebacker when you're talking to him. So he's someone that I'm really intrigued to see how it plays out. And I know that even with Tyler Atkinson and Xavier Griffin and some of the other top linebackers in the state, Braden Rouse is as wanted as anybody across the board. I will also throw in there a name that I am fascinated to see where his recruitment goes to. That's Craig Dandridge. He's a wide receiver from Cambridge High School. He was on his junior day. He just got offered sometime earlier in January, but he got on Georgia's radar during the 7-on-7 season last summer, maintained some relationships, went to the Auburn game, waited around, waited his turn, got an offer. Georgia has really started to prioritize him here. I'm going to see him this weekend on Sunday, so I'm really excited I haven't gotten to see him really in any kind of camp setting or full game setting at all, and so I'm excited to see that on Sunday as well. But yeah, that's a guy that I am really excited to see, what he is capable of, and someone that Georgia has certainly seen something with early. I will add, every question that I've gotten since junior day has centered around one position group, and I think that it's fair. It's a position group that Georgia only took one at last cycle, but there were two big-time running backs on campus last weekend, Savion Hyder as well as Derek Cooper. I am reserving too much feedback from those visits right now, and that has nothing to do with how they went. I think that in both cases, I'm expecting them to schedule official visits. In Derek Cooper's case in particular, I definitely am expecting an official visit to be scheduled. And I think that those things are already in the works. Like, those details are already getting ironed out. But these are going to be two super high profile running back recruitments because of the nature of some of the programs that are recruiting them. It's going to be highly competitive. So I don't want to give any false hope. And this is not me pumping the brakes and saying I don't think Georgia has a good shot with either of these guys. I think that they do. You've heard me in the past say I think they will sign at least one of Derek Cooper or Savion Hyder, just the way that they've approached it. That said, I don't feel comfortable pushing one versus the other right now. And there's a lot of other running backs on the board just because they are big time running backs. They're top 30 players in the country. They're likely going to be 5 stars in both cases. And so I'm reserving judgment on either of those. We will have more updates coming from both of them, but I would say the next course of action is looking at Savion Hyder to get an official visit scheduled, and then looking for Derek Cooper to get that official visit finalized as well. But I'm feeling good about Georgia getting that locked in with Cooper.
It's a huge position of need for Georgia in this cycle. And, if I've learned anything from following the recruiting reporters like Ben, it's follow the visits, follow the official visits. And with those two, I like them getting at least one of them. On that first episode we did, I put Derek Cooper as my predict to commit, but long way to go. And we'll just see how it plays out with both of those guys.
For sure. I expect there to be some types of news over the next month or so. And, this, I think, transitions well into where I wanted to go, is talking about what's next in recruiting and just looking at the national calendar and what it means. And I think, you all probably hear me use the phrase calendar way more than I probably should, because it's just the way that my brain operates when it comes to the recruiting time of year. And I think that that's going to be the case for most college coaches. I think that Jordan's got something, if you're watching on video, that he's going to pull up here as well, just to kind of give you an idea of where things are with recruiting and the recruiting calendar in general. And so as of, I want to say it was February 3rd, we entered a dead period, and we're going to be in a dead period from now until March 2nd. What a dead period means. Some people think that means that there's no recruiting going on. That's the furthest thing from the truth. That just means college coaches cannot be on high school campuses or going to do in-home visits or anything like that. And it also means that high school players cannot come and take college visits on the school's campuses. What that means is college coaches get a little bit of a reprieve. This is one of their only times a year where they're getting a little bit of a breather. I think I saw Glenn Schumann was out today at the 16th hole at the Waste Management Open. I know that, there's some other folks around the program that are getting some much needed, well-deserved beach vacations as well. And so I know this is a somewhat relaxing time of year for those folks. That said, there's definitely some action that's going to be going on behind the scenes. I already know, not with Georgia, but I already know of a top 100 player from the state of Georgia that's likely going to make his college commitment within the next couple of weeks or so. And that has my alarm bells up. My sensors have raised and said, okay, who else might be making some decisions like that? Is this a time of year where you can expect some of those higher priority targets to come off the board, because schools are going to be making that push for them as much or as early as possible? March 3rd is when the quiet period will start, and that means that's when recruits are able to start visiting college campuses again. That's when, I don't know, Jordan, do you know when college or Georgia's spring practice starts? Do we have a date on that yet?
So they haven't said for sure, and I'm going to double check the dates, but just based on the way they've had it set up these last few weeks, or the last few years rather, I am expecting Georgia to start on Tuesday, March 11th, and that would fall in line where they would have those 15 practices, and G-Day, that 15th practice, would be on Saturday, April 12th. So March 11th is what it looks like when, just based on what they've done in past years, that's when Georgia would get started.
So that quiet period would start about a week prior to that, which means they'd probably start hosting some recruits around March 3rd, maybe a few days after that. They might have some throwing sessions or whatever things they might be doing separately from official spring practices. But once those spring practices start, they're going to start inviting 2026s, 2027s regularly on campus. And that quiet period runs until April 14th. And so if you're wondering why the spring game is now Masters Saturday and not later as it used to be, that's why. Kirby Smart lives by the calendar. And Jordan, if you scroll down a little bit, I don't know if you're able to do that as well, you can see the full calendar of dates down in the February, March, April range. I promise you, this calendar is gospel when it comes to college football recruiting. If you ever see why Georgia has certain things scheduled or when they're making coaching, this is why the coaching change conversation around Mike Bobo happening the week that it was happening was so ludicrous to me, because they were in the middle of Georgia coaches needing to be on the road to go see recruits, and they were about to be hosting a junior day. And for an offensive coordinator change to be happening at that point in time with the calendar was outrageous. if you live by this calendar, I promise you Kirby Smart lives by this calendar. It'll make your life a lot easier trying to figure out when those types of things are going to be happening. Coaches will be able to start going back out on the road, seeing guys during high school practices. I believe, I think it's April 15th. So I think it's that Monday right after Georgia's spring game. And that's when you'll start seeing Georgia coaches get out on the road. And that's when we'll really be fine-tuning and tweaking some of our, here's the guys that Georgia really wants this cycle. I think that's the window when we'll really start to learn who Georgia is keyed in on in this class. All right. I know that the early signing period, we just talked about the calendar. The calendar has changed so much that the early signing period has completely cannibalized the traditional signing period. We did not have a single piece of recruiting news that took place yesterday, which is not necessarily the greatest sales pitch for a recruiting website, but you were there in December. You saw what we were doing in December, and you're now seeing how our focus is on junior days. Our focus is on the 2026 class. It's not on signing that 2025 class, but just for the purposes of, putting the finishing touches on that. Georgia finished with the number 2 class behind only number 1 Texas. Half of Georgia's 28 signees finished in the top 24/7. 20 of those recruits were blue chip recruits that were either 4-star or 5 stars. We got a really good feedback. We put out an article at Dogs 24/7, and I encourage you all to go check out some of our in-depth thoughts on why we chose certain guys for each of them. But we had some superlatives that we put out. We thought we got some positive feedback on this as well. So I just sort of wanted to run through them. Instant impact guys. Kit picked Darren Kenigbon. You picked Isaiah Gibson. I picked Elijah Griffin. Feel free to chime in here with any of your thoughts in any of these spots where it makes sense. NFL Combine. Who's going to tear it up at the NFL Combine? Kip had Landon Roldan. You had Elijah Griffin. I had CJ Wiley. I think all 3 of those are really fantastic picks. I don't know why I like this one so much, the blank award winner, picking who we think could win a certain award. Kit picked Zayden Walker to win the Butkus Award. You picked Elias Williams to win the Mackey Award, and I picked Talon Taylor to win the Bolitnikoff Award. I could see any of those 3 happening as well. First to the podium, I thought this was a hilarious how we thought about this one, because you picked Dominic Kelly, which I think anybody who watched our live show for the early signing period, I think that you saw how brilliant of a guy he is. I mean, his vocabulary for someone that's still supposed to be a junior in high school right now is pretty outrageous. I think you saw why reclassification was pretty easy for him. I think that Kip, he picked Juan Gaston. I picked Todd Robinson. I think that a big reason for that is they don't say a whole lot, and they're guys that I think could play early. And so if you can play early and you're not going to say a whole lot, Kirby Smart knows you're not going to cause any trouble when you get to the microphone. We do have some other superlatives. 3-star gem, players that we don't want you to forget about, players that in 2 years we think you should really watch out for. So definitely go check that out over at Dogs 24/7. But I did want to call out, we had someone in the comment section, Bruce0902, on the Junkyard over at Dogs 24/7. He asked first off the bus. My answer was Elias Williams. You got to see the first off the plane at the Sugar Bowl, Jordan. Was there anybody that stood out to you first off the plane?
That's tough. I mean, I feel like just Elijah Griffin's who initially comes to mind for me. I mean, he just looks the part. And going back to one of those first ones we did where it's like immediate impact, a guy who can play right away. You look at the need at that position. Elijah wasn't a guy that I picked for that category, but I mean, he looks the part to me. I think once you get him in and get him settled, it's going to be hard to hold him back.
I said this, and we talk about this a little bit, I guess, as a teaser for the interview that we're going to get into here with Andrew Ivins here in a second. 5 stars are 5 stars for a reason. So you look across, not just in the 24/7 sports rankings, but across the industry, guys that rank as 5 stars, Elijah Griffin, Isaiah Gibson, Zayden Walker, Elias Williams, they're 5-star. Juan Gaston, they're 5 stars because when you see them, you say, holy, these guys are out of control. And that's why they're 5 stars. They are the first off the bus type of guys. And so I think, when you're asking the first off the bus question, you're really asking who are the guys that scream at you as 5 stars, and the ones that are 5 stars this cycle definitely do. All right. We're about to have a 50-minute interview. So if you're listening to this on podcast, settle in. I hope you've got a long car ride ahead of you. If you're watching live, hope you grab some dinner, enjoy yourself. Andrew Ivins, director of scouting for 24/7 Sports. I love the way that this dude thinks about football. I love the level of detail that he puts into his examination and evaluation of all of these prospects nationally. It is a thankless job. It is an impossible job. We get into his process, what he's gotten right through the years, what he's gotten wrong through the years. We look at this 2025 class. We look ahead to the current roster, do a little bit of 2026 look ahead. Really, really good stuff with Ivins. Excited for you all to watch that. Before we do that, I highly recommend a Dogs 24/7 subscription. If you enjoy listening to these shows, whether it be the Stay Wolk UGA Recruiting Show edition, whether it be just our standard Junkyard Dawgcast where we're talking all things football, all things basketball, all things baseball, subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We have great VIP content that we provide for you there as well. If you subscribe to Dogs 24/7, you also get a free Paramount Plus subscription. It's probably one of the most undersold elements of the Dogs 24/7 subscription. I know anybody that I know that has wife, has kids, it's very easy to sell. Hey, yeah, this is a Paramount Plus subscription. This isn't me going to get 24/7 Georgia recruiting news. So definitely play that card around Valentine's Day, around, upcoming holidays, whatever that may be. Get yourself a Dogs 24/7 subscription. Also, please subscribe the YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcast or Spotify. Jordan, what you got before we hop over to Ivins?
Was just going to say, for folks who are watching or listening to this on Thursday, we have a 60% off sale that I believe will end at midnight Eastern time on Thursday. So jump on it while it's around. We'll have some more sales a little bit later on the year, but this is a great time. We're about a month away from the start of spring practice. Ben's got all kinds of good stuff from Junior Day. I could not recommend highly enough jumping on board now. 60% off. That's a really good sale.
That's why you're a pro, Jordan. You always remember you're always thinking of management. You've got them in mind. I would have disappointed them yet again had I not brought that up. So definitely jump in with that. I'll also say, hell, if you want to shoot Jordan a follow on socials, at Jordan Davis Hill on Twitter. I think it's Jordan Hill 1447 or Jordan D Hill 1447 on Instagram. I don't know if you're pushing your Instagram these days or not, but if you want to, at Benjamin Wolk for me. And then I am trying to get my Instagram going a little bit better just with some Georgia coverage. So Stay Wolk 247 for me on Instagram. Jordan, let's hit the ads for the company folks. And then let's dive into this interview with Andrew Ivins right after the break. All right, welcome into the Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show. We have a very, very special guest. It's his first time on the show, but I think it's fair to say you're a great friend of the show, integral part of the 24/7 Sports Recruiting Network. I would argue the integral part of the 24/7 Sports Recruiting Network. We've got a Florida Atlantic Owl, recently a Stanley Cup champion. Go Panthers. If you are 5'8", if you run a 5'2", 40, definitely tweet at him. Let him know that you need him to watch your film, that you need your stars. It is the 24/7 Sports National Director of Scouting, Andrew Ivins. Thank you for joining us.
I appreciate you having me on here. Yeah, I mean, big Florida Panthers fan. I have not watched any games this season. I'm a new father, so that has gone to the wayside. It's just work and parenting as of late.
Well, this is one I've been really excited to have you on just because I think it can be very educational for our audience to learn a little bit more about what goes into this. And I will start with an easy one. Believe me, I'm going to have my questions grilling you on some things, but I want everyone to understand what you do a little bit better as well. So it sounds like a stupid question from your vantage point, I'm sure, but what exactly does the director of scouting do for us?
Well, I'm in charge of our rankings, right? The top 247, kind of that entire process. And, last week we came out with the finalized top 247 for the class of 2025. And really, I think a lot of people look at it in this vacuum. I mean, they've known these prospects because you guys have written about them for a little bit. And maybe there's some guys in the states of where they live, these big names that you kind of learn about throughout the recruiting and as Georgia pursues them. But for us, really, I mean, this is a group of players that, we've been tracking for 2.5 years now, right? And it's thousands of hours that go into these evaluations, us trying to gather as much information as we can and then figure out, all right, how are we going to stack these guys? Who are the ones that we want to, kind of take a chance on and push them up the board? Because, when there's a 5-star or a 4-star designation, like we live with that forever, right? I always see the graphic out there of DJU, former 5-star, and it's certainly easy to poke holes in that ranking now. But, at the time, all right, he was this heralded prospect coming out, and there was a ton of reasons why. So I oversee it. I have a 24/7 sports scouting department. We got 5-6 guys there all around the country, and I run our meetings. And then ultimately, I'm the guy that has to make some of the difficult decisions. And it's not just one voice, I would say, that is steering these rankings. I mean, there's just a group effort. There's a lot of back and forth, but sometimes, you need someone to make the difficult call. And that's kind of where I step in. So, we've tweaked the rankings process more and more recently. And our goal is to, get as many first-round draft picks in that 5-star range. And I think really this upcoming NFL draft, I think, just kind of looking at the mocks, reading what's coming out of the Senior Bowl and the Shrine Bowl, I think we're going to have anywhere from 12 to 14 former 5-stars going in the first round. And then, I think there's only going to be a handful of 3-star guys. It's a lot of 4-stars, guys that we're knocking on the door. So we've refined our process. We're not going to get everything right. The guys on Sundays don't get everything right. We don't get everything right. But I think just the recruiting industry as a whole has improved so much with the rankings process, really, I think over the past 5 years, taking steps forward. I mean, we're always going back and looking to previously, all right, what did it look like a few years ago? And I think we've gotten more and more dialed, and I'm feeling good about it. Like this 2026 class is really kind of the one where we've had some of our new technology from our jump, and I'm excited just to see what this looks like, 5 years down the line.
So you're telling me that when a guy commits to Georgia and Alabama, you don't just throw a 5th star on him and say, oh, he committed to Georgia and Alabama, he must need a 5th star?
Yeah, well, we get asked that all the time. Hey, there's certain biases, and, you guys are just trying to push the SEC kids up the board. Well, if you look at the NFL draft trends, like the SEC's had the most NFL draft picks, year over year. The conference tends to get the best players, but there is parity that's creeping in. I think name, image, and likeness has certainly changed this landscape. I think the revenue sharing as well. And, we're not going to scout logos. We're scouting with our own eyes. We're not scouting with our ears. We're not listening to what different colleges say. And really that's because player movement is at an all-time high. I mean, this winter transfer portal session that opened up, 3,000 names went in. I mean, how can we bet on a prospect signing with the school and finishing out his career there, right? So, I think we had an SMU signee finish in the top 32 as a 5-star prospect. That was the first time ever. Duke signed their highest ranked recruit ever. We named like 10 group of 5 signees, 4-star prospects. So we're trying to get the evaluation right. It doesn't really matter where they are going to school.
Well, you said something at the top that I always try and reinforce to our folks as well, and I think y'all do an unbelievable job. You mentioned there's a great team that y'all have as part of your scouting group, and you also acknowledge like you're not going to be able to get everything right because nobody in the football world gets every single evaluation right. It's an unrealistic expectation, but the hit rate that you all have on 5 stars to first-round draft picks is unbelievable. And I really wanted to start there just because y'all just finished up the class of 2025 rankings. I know that a lot of work went into that. Have you had a chance to breathe at all, or are you guys already on 2026s?
We are already into 2026s, and then we got, the 2027 class and 2028 on deck. So had a weekend off, but we're jumping right back into it. Hey, we have the Under Armour camp in Atlanta this upcoming weekend. So
I know. I'm looking forward to it.
It's a 52 week year-round job.
So you had 4 5 stars, and Georgia tends to have a lot of 5 stars in your rankings as well, just the way that they recruit. But they had 4 in the most recent rankings. That was defensive lineman Elijah Griffin, edge Isaiah Gibson, offensive lineman Juan Gaston, and linebacker Zayden Walker. I tell people all the time, like 5 stars are usually pretty obvious when you see them. Like the measurables are there, the look is there. Do you have an official distinction between what makes someone a 5 star and what doesn't?
I think you said it best. Like when you see it, you kind of know. And what's interesting and really kind of like peel it back, and you listen to NFL scouts on the other side, right? You talk about like first round grades, and usually in most draft classes, there's only like 16 prospects that a NFL team will identify as like, all right, these are our first round players, and then really kind of 16 through 50. Opinions vary. And I think for us as well, maybe the 2024 class that we just had felt really good about a lot of those guys. When we came into the All-Star game season for this last update, I think there was only like 12 consensus, like, all right, we are 100% sold that this guy is a 5-star prospect. And, I said it a few minutes ago, like we live with this 5-star designation forever throughout these prospects' careers. And that's why we're trying to get it right. And I think since I've kind of stepped into my role, we're going to, take our shots on the guys that we feel the best about, the guys that we have the most information, the guys that we've had those live exposure points to. And, the All-Star game setting has certainly kind of changed here with so many guys enrolling early, so many guys participating in bowl practices. But if we can get these kids in a best on best setting, which really kind of mirrors the Senior Bowl, the Shrine Bowl on the other side, or even like the NFL scouting combine, you're going to feel a little more convicted in that individual. And, we're making some really difficult decisions. It's like, we're talking about a half inch in a measurement here, a tenth of a second in a 100-meter dash, a difference of 100 career receiving yards. Like, I think, the second round of our rankings, right? So outside of that 5-star status, like 33 through 64, like I think that's the most buttoned up it's ever been, because like a lot of these guys were considered for 5th stars. Right? They were just kind of the odd men's out because we felt better about some other prospects. So that's a long-winded answer. How do we know? I mean, normally we were looking for guys that check off the most boxes. Just based on, what we've seen. Like the tape is certainly going to be the baseline for the evaluation, but the more boxes that they can check, the more comfortable we're going to feel about them. And football is a genetic sports, right? So we're looking for guys that have the measurables, right? We want individuals that have multi-sport participation. Like you look at the guys going in the first round the past couple of years, a lot of them played multiple sports. We're looking for guys that are 3-phase players, right? And then I think the biggest thing is we want guys where the arrow's pointing up, right? We want them to be embarking on their collegiate career, starting to play some of their best football. We want to see that growth potential, because at the end of the day, we're projecting long-term, right? We're not projecting what they're going to look like year 1, year 2. It's, year 5, 6, 7, 8 when they're doing it on Sundays.
Andrew, I don't know if I've told you this, but we actually stole I hear you say arrow pointing up all the time. We actually stole that phrasing for a segment on our show. And it's not always about recruits. Sometimes it's just random things that we think are trending in the right direction. But I should have probably asked your permission before I stole arrow pointing up, but we do use it on this show.
I do not have it trademarked yet.
Okay.
Eventually, cool. Maybe if the 105 gets some gear, maybe that'll be on a shirt, arrow pointing up.
There we go. So there were 3 of those guys that we mentioned have kind of been staple 5 stars throughout the last year or so: Griffin, Gibson, and Zayden Walker. But there was one somewhat eye-opening 5-star on the Georgia side of things in the final rankings. Juan Gaston moves up 90 spots to that 5-star ranking. I believe it was number 18 overall. I'll admit, when he showed up to Orlando and I saw that he measured in at 388, I was a little bit worried, but it sounds like it didn't hamper him at all. What ultimately earned him that 5th star?
Yeah, well, 388, 368, the numbers have been all over the place. The bottom line is he looks like he's 300 pounds. And this is a kid that I had on my freaks list. Kind of a college coach put him on my radar. They're like, this is a big individual, but you got to see the way that he moves. And that was really our first live exposure to Juan Gaston since this time last year at the Under Armour camp. And he looked a little bit, I would say, slimmer, but for a guy his size, his ability to move and react at that weight, it's extremely rare. And it's like, all right, we're trying to find a player comp for him. I think the one on the profile is Cam Williams, who was at Texas, starting tackle for Texas this past season. He's projected to go in the first round in this upcoming draft. A lot of mock drafts have him in there. And it's just the sheer size, right? But if you're going to be that big, you have to be an exceptional athlete. And I thought Juan Gaston, the 2 practices there in Orlando, he really looked the part. And then the same thing in the game, right? So we had this, day 3 grade on him. You dig back into the tape after seeing him in this best on best setting. All right, now you notice how he's moving. All right, he's playing some defensive line. He's shooting gaps and making tackles in the backfield. All right, then you dig back into the basketball tape, and he's just, he's a freak at his size, and kind of reminds me a little bit of Evan Neal. Came out many years ago, played at Alabama, went to onto the NFL, and he's in much better shape than Evan Neal was at this stage. And Juan, the more we learned about this group in the all-star setting, the more we all kind of fell in love with him. And it's a really talented year for offensive tackles. We got 9 offensive linemen that finished as 5 stars. That's the most ever in the 24/7 sports era. We've been doing this 10 years in a row. And, I think that position, just with where we are at right now in football, you think about all these pass rushes, they're so supercharged. And I'm talking at all levels, right? You see it in high school, you certainly see it in college. And then in the NFL, the pass rushes have gotten so good that the decision makers are flipping over and trying to find more and more offensive linemen. And it's super difficult, right? These bodies that can move the way Juan Gaston does. Cooper Patagna, on my scouting team always says it, like, that's a cat that's going to have 9 lives. Someone is going to see that size and give this kid a chance after chance after chance after chance. So, he's one that certainly became a darling for us. And they think about it like this, right? Transfer portal, everyone wants to talk about it, and for good reason. But you look at the national title game, right? So you got Ohio State and Notre Dame. 18 of the 22 starters for each program were homegrown high school recruits, guys they signed out of high school. All 10 of the starting offensive linemen in that game were high school recruits that were signed, out of high school, and they weren't any transfers. So, I certainly think that's a trend, offensive line, and that's really the theme of the class. And I think Georgia's getting a good one, right? He's going to excel in a power-based scheme because that's what he is. He's a big bully, right? He turns pass reps into run blocks extremely easy.
For sure. No, I was just, as someone who's gotten to know Juan, I was super pumped when I saw that he was getting elevated to that 5-star status. I think he's a quiet guy for his size, and I think that sometimes that gets misconstrued as, he's not competitive enough or whatever that might be. He's as competitive of a dude as I've been around, and I know that when he gets on the field, he will increase his chirp level compared to what he does when he's not on the field. But I like that one as well. I mentioned already Elijah Griffin, the number 1 defensive lineman, Isaiah Gibson, the number 1 edge, Zayden Walker, the number 1 linebacker. You mentioned the phrase, and I was going to bring this up too. You say it. I love it when you say it. Football is a genetic sport. I feel like all 3 of those guys really fit into that football is a genetic sport DNA.
Yeah, and this is where I think the strength of Georgia's class is. And, coincidentally, like Georgia, all right, you look at the 2025 projected depth chart, where they're going to need some help right away. It's in that front 7, and more specifically, the guys that are in the trenches. They need some individuals to kind of come in, given what they're losing. I mean, they're going to potentially lose, it could be 2 or 3, first round picks up there, at least 1 or 2 of them. And Elijah Griffin, seeing him in Orlando, another one where it was like the first exposure point in a while. And yeah, we watched the tapes, we watched the games, but then you get around this kid and he shows a little bit more than he does on tape. I mean, he kind of dictated practices at the Under Armour All-American game, and they're not as ramped up as they are at the Navy All-American Bowl. But I thought he was excellent. I mean, he's a kid that's legitimately 6'4", 300 pounds, carries it extremely well. And to me, it's like, okay, I can see this guy playing for Georgia, given kind of the need they have in the interior. And yeah, playing a lower level of competition there in the Peach State, but it's year-over-year production. I mean, we're talking over 60 tackles for loss, close to 40 sacks over a 4-year stretch. I mean, he has checked off box after box. And the freaky thing with Elijah Griffin, back when he was like a sophomore, had a 30-inch vertical jump, over 30 inches at like 280 pounds. So he's got some juice there. Isaiah Gibson, he's another one where like the weight has fluctuated. He's been 245 pounds. He's been 270 pounds. We didn't get him in San Antonio. We were kind of hoping he would be there. I think he's like the ideal 4-eye, and I'm interested to see what Georgia does with him, because I think you could stand him up, but I think his future is going to be hand in the dirt, a guy that can hold up traffic. He knows how to use those long levers, another kind of exceptional multi-sport athlete. Zayden Walker, to me, our player comp for him has been Jalen Walker, and he's been a fun and unique evaluation. And I bring up Jalen Walker because I think Zayden Walker, no relation. Like, I think he's got on-ball, off-ball versatility. And I kind of lean maybe more of an edge rusher with him than I do a traditional kind of like interior linebacker. I think that's his future. Another one where it's like, all right, we're hoping to get him at one of these all-star games. He stays with Georgia. That's fine. But really stands out to me on Zayden Walker is the day before he went on his official visit to UGA, he worked out for Kirby Smart and those guys at one of Kirby Smart's summer camps. And like, in this age, it is so insane to me that like this blue chip established prospects, like, yeah, I'll run the 40-yard dash for you. Yeah, you can put a GPS system on me. Yeah, I'll go through some pass rushing drills. Like, I think they have found a guy that fits that program. And then, the other thing on the defensive line, right? So they had 3 5-stars that finished for us. Darren Akinabong, Chase Linton, like, I would classify those guys as 5-star talents. Like, we just didn't have the live exposure to them. Like, both of those individuals were seriously like considered, as we met for the final 5-star ranking. Like Chase Linton, man, I think you watch what he did as a senior. You want to talk about a late bloomer, like his edge tape is up there with all the other guys in this edge class. Darren Akinabong, over 100 tackles. I think he's another 4-eye, very young for the grade, wrestling background. So yeah, Georgia reloaded at the point of attack. And it kind of follows up what they did last year, building that great wall of Athens. Like, the future of the trench play for Georgia looks very, very bright in my eyes when we try to project a few years down the line.
Yeah, shout out Chidera Uzo-Daribe. He was the lead recruiter on Isaiah Gibson, Chase Linton, and Darren Akinabong, 3 top 50 guys. I think that they really upgraded at that position. You mentioned Chase and Darren. Was there anyone else that was maybe flirting in the conversation for a 5th star?
Yeah, I mean, Talon Taylor, the wide receiver, I'm a monster fan of him. I know he finished as a 5-star some other places, and he was excellent in San Antonio. And you remember with Talon, he missed a big chunk of his junior year, and then as a senior there in Illinois, like, I thought he had as good of a senior season as any of the wide receivers in America. I think his ability to plant and create separation, so stick and go, it's the best in the class. And you think about Georgia, what they want to do in that passing attack. Like, this is a guy that can run a deep slant. This is a guy that can run the post and get open and stay on time. And Georgia, we'll see what the offense looks like in the coming years. New quarterbacks are in there, but it's such timing based. And, he's one we really, really liked. I love the fact that he went to classes for like 2 days in Athens and then decided to show up there in San Antonio. So he's one where, I could be losing sleep over it at some point down the line. And then Elias Williams, the tight end, like, he is a reincarnation of Darnell Williams. Right. And, you think about where Darnell went, and he had such an impact for Georgia, as that 6th offensive lineman. I mean, he was a true difference maker. But he was a 3rd-round pick, and the tight end position. What's the value of it really? I mean, how many of those guys are going to go in the 1st round? We'll see. But he was another one where I thought, as a senior at Camden County, showed much more as a pass catcher. So he's another guy. I think 5-star tools just couldn't find a spot for him with some of those other tight. I mean, we only had one tight end there in the top 32, but for Todd Hartley in Georgia, like, you don't bet against kids like Elias Williams.
Well, you actually segued me perfectly into my next question. So I asked our board, I was curious, like, what are some things that you all want to know about? And you know how fans get. They're always more upset by the guys that get dropped than the guys that see the rises. And that's just natural, I think, instinct, the way human nature, the way that people act. But I guess my question is, why do you hate Georgia tight ends so much?
Do we hate Georgia tight ends so much?
No, so the reason I ask it that way, you brought up Elias Williams there as well, and I know that he was very much in the conversation for 5-star. I think because of the senior year that he had, people ask a lot of questions about Ethan Barbour, and you mentioned it there. Like the tight end position in general, I think is a tough one to project in terms of how the NFL values it. But like, what I guess was it about the tight ends that Georgia brought in that maybe had them drop down a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I just think with the case with Elias Williams, it's like, all right, we got around some other guys, Keody Armstrong, who is headed to, he's going to go play his football at Texas A&M. Like, you want to talk about a 6 offensive lineman, like he was the all lobby team, alpha dog, checking for the All-American Bowl. I mean, 6'5", 268 pounds. Wingspan like 7'9", and then he was excellent all week. So it's like, all right, we have this live exposure to him. We've seen him. I think we felt a little more comfortable there. You have Andrew Ivins, who's also ahead of Elias Williams, headed to Penn State. 4-1-3 in the short shuttle. He's playing cornerback as a senior while also doubling as a tight end. So we like those guys, and this is just kind of where Elias slotted in, and like Deshaun Brame headed to Tennessee, awesome at the Polynesian Bowl. There was conversations about, all right, how do we want to stack these guys? Deshaun Brame, 3 punt return touchdowns as a senior, and he's like 260 pounds. And then an awesome out there in Hawaii. With Ethan Barbour, I think you see the numbers, right? You see the tape. I got live exposure to him. Milton came down, played in South Florida, like not like the biggest individual. I think he's kind of a role player, H-back type of tight end. And, maybe I'll be eating my words here in like 2 or 3 years after he's in that Georgia strength program, because I saw a photo of Chris Cole the other day and I was like, holy shit, Chris Cole, like, what are they pumping him with there? Like, didn't even look like the same individual. Fired up about him. So, I think it's kind of like more of a role. And, he kept his same grade as a 91. I loved what he was able to do as a Wildcat quarterback. You kind of dig into, all right, these tight ends that hit, guys that take direct snaps, like that is a key indicator for him with Ethan Barbour. So, I just think he doesn't maybe have the alignment flexibility or the upside of some of these guys. And I kind of question if he's as elite of an athlete as some of those other individuals. Now, that doesn't mean he can't go to Georgia, play in 12 and 13 personnel and have 500 yards receiving his junior and senior years and get drafted. There's just some more tight ends I think we liked a little bit more.
No, I love that answer. And what I always say to folks too, it's like, anytime I ask you or Hudson or anything like that, like, hey, I would love to just understand this more. Like, there are always sound, logical football reasons to go into this. And like you mentioned multiple times, like when you have 400 4-star or better players, like a lot of times you're splitting hairs at certain spot ranges as well. I am curious, when you drop a guy in the rankings, is there a certain fan base that gives you the most hell?
Every fan base. And I think what transpired last Wednesday just sums up the rankings process. The Michigan fan base message board is like, hey, why isn't Bryce Underwood's grade a 101? And I'm like, guys, I woke up this morning and I thought the last thing I would have to answer to is why the number 1 player in the country isn't ranked higher. So, it is what it is. And like I said, I mean, we're not going to get everything right. Like, I think anyone that says they're going to get it all right and this is the answer. I mean, again, this is like thousands of hours. This is like every single day. Like, you are eating in your part of this. And this is how we see it at the finish line. At some point, you got to put your hands up. And then the guys we get wrong, like, we're going to dig into them and we're going to figure out, all right, like, what did we miss? Right. I think a prime example of a tight end where I just absolutely flat out missed is Mason Taylor, who went to LSU, right? Probably going to be a day 2 pick in the upcoming draft. Like, his dad was Jason Taylor. And it's like, I don't know, saw him a bunch in high school. Like, the testing data wasn't good. And then it's like, all right, he's an example. So I've gone back and watched him. So we're always trying to improve. We're always trying to learn. And some of my favorite exercises, you watch football on Saturdays, right? Like, watching it at home. guys popping off, like go back and watch what he did as a senior, his senior tape. I think, I always encourage our guys to do that. It's like, all right, let's see what this individual looked like coming out. So, hey, maybe when the next one comes along, we do get that one right.
We need to change the culture on this. Like if you're a Georgia fan listening to this, don't tweet at Andrew and say something that you think they should be higher in the rankings. Tweet at Andrew and tell him someone that he nailed the rankings on. So if you're listening to this, he had Jalen Walker as a 5-star. Go tell him that he had Jalen Walker as a 5-star.
Oh well, the ones we get right, those are the easy ones. So that's what we've quickly learned.
Absolutely. I did want to ask about a couple of the risers that you had there, end of cycle, maybe guys that we don't talk about enough or as much on our end. Rayshawn Dinkins from Georgia, he moved up, I think, 53 spots to 165. And then I'm a Peachtree Ridge grad, so anytime that a Peachtree Ridge grad bumps in the rankings, everyone thinks that there's biases coming in on my end. You can tell the folks I have no role in this whatsoever, but Dennis Uzochukwu does earn his 4th star right there at the end. What can you tell us about either of those two guys and why they saw a little bit of a rise at the end?
Yeah, I mean, Rayshawn Dinkins, and I'm kind of personally, proud of like how our safety rankings came together. It's such a fascinating position for me to evaluate. And, I'll bring up Notre Dame and Ohio State again. Like both those teams, in my opinion, had like 2 of the top safeties in the game, right? And Xavier Watts and Caleb Downs. And I'm not trying to like touch on a sore spot with Caleb Downs there, but like, those guys just unlock so many things, right? They see the field so well. And I think with where the game's at right now, like you need safeties that I call them like 5-tool center fielders. They can do a little bit of everything, right? And I think the biggest thing is, yeah, tackling is important, but like, can they man up and can they cover? And Rayshawn Dinkins, to me, you turn on the senior tape and you're like, whoa, all right, like this dude is instinctive. He's consistently in the right place at the right time, and he's making plays. And like, okay, yeah, he's a hair over 5'10". Like a lot of people freak out. All right, that's not like the ideal measurables, but it's like, man, you watch the NFL, like a lot of these safeties, like they aren't over 6 feet, right? Like the guys that are high IQ, FBI, all that stuff, those are the ones that are hanging around the league for the long time because they are just such cheat codes back there. And Rayshawn, he's tested off the charts. So he's got like a 40-inch vertical jump, 9.11 in the broad, 4.56 in the 40, 4.5 in the shuttle. And really he's one where it's like, we are leaning on the tape. And I think if you look at our safety rankings, yeah, there's some boundary safeties in there. Like our top ranked guy, Jonah Williams. I mean, he's the ultimate freak, headed to Texas, but you'll notice like it's a lot of guys that can also cover. And hey, maybe football will shift back in a few years where, those guys won't be put in islands and one-on-one situations. But right now that's what like we're kind of prioritizing. And the more we watch, the more we saw of some of these guys, it's like, all right, we need to get him a little bit higher just based on what he has done and what we think he can be. Who was the other one? Dennis, right?
Dennis Uzochukwu, yeah.
Yeah, Dennis, I actually saw him in like the first game of his senior season. They came down and also played in that Broward showcase, and he was committed at the time to Georgia State. And I was like, all right, make a note on him. And then we finally got some measurements on him, and they were like near identical to Broderick Jones coming out a while back. And I said it on the front end, like, this is the year of the offensive tackle, in my opinion. Like, I think a lot of these guys are going to go on to get drafted. And as we were like, all right, what do we want to do with some of these final, 5-star spots? I was like, let's use them on the offensive tackles and make it a point that like we truly do believe like this is one of the strengths of the class. And he's a guy that is going to take some time, right? Like he is certainly raw, but he has exceptional length, exceptional size. He is also a basketball player. Like we have this thing, next gen prospects, or that they'll generate speed and explosion scores based on track and field. And I think he's got like an 87 explosion score because he like ran track as a true freshman. So he's super athletic. He's a guy that you're going to have to put on ice, but like for Georgia, which has, certainly an embarrassment of bodies up front. Like he's a guy where you can put him there. You can give him some developmental years. So I think he's got a huge huge ceiling, and I think he's got a chance to potentially play left tackle, and that's certainly rare. And there's like a few other guys that fit into this mold. Cool, who's headed to Iowa State, like same thing, like super light. But you look at them, and it's like, all right, this is a potential tree on the corner.
And to confirm, my Peachy Ridge biases don't play into the rankings whatsoever.
Oh, no. Hey, I'm always asking you for like, hey, have you seen this guy? You know, you were at this event. We're trying to gather information, but you know, the message is where, hey, I cover Georgia. This guy should be higher because he's going to Georgia. Those are taken with a grain of salt. Hey, there's one other kind of like riser I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, of course.
Let me pull him up. Why can I not remember his name? Anthony Crua, linebacker. Yeah. Georgia flips him from UNC. I mentioned Jalen Walker being the comp for Zayden Walker. Like, yeah, that works, but like, I think Anthony Crua is kind of like budget Jalen Walker. Yeah. Big fan of his athletic profile. I think what he can be, another guy on ball, off ball versatility. I think Georgia's going to play more as a straight up linebacker. But I think that was like a sneaky good get for the Bulldogs, and you know what he was able to do as a wide receiver. Like he is a plus athlete, and you know we'll see what happens at Georgia, right? Like they don't recruit really to develop at a lot of those positions. Like you come in, you're expected to play relatively soon, or you're in the transfer portal. But he's one where I think we could regret. It's like, man, wish we had this guy in the top 247 at some point down the line.
Of all the guys that we've talked about, I know you do your annual freaks list where you sort of break down who the freakiest players are. Is there anyone in this class that you would label as freak?
Yeah, I mean, Juan Gaston, like I can't wait till like the workout videos and stuff get out of him in Athens, or like even when he's warming up at some point down the line. Like for a guy that, again, is rumored to be 380 pounds, last number we got on him is 386. Like, dude, he can put his ass on the grass. It's like insane mobility for an individual that size. So he's one. You know, Elias obviously as well. Like what he does on the basketball court, averages a double-double, like all region player of the year type of stuff. He is, again, Darnell Washington is the comp. Like he is going to get into an NFL combine setting, and everyone's going to be drooling over him. You know, the guy I can't like really figure out is CJ Wiley to me. Like all the athletic juice is there. Like every time I've seen him in person, like I've just kind of left wanting some more. But then there are the moments on tape, right? And he's a guy that can get vertical, big size. I think getting, you know, some beef at that wide receiver position is becoming more and more important just with how large these cornerbacks are getting on the outside. Like it's going to be hard to create separation. So, you know, can you body guys out? And CJ Wiley has all that in there. So he's one. I think he was on the list as well. So those are kind of really the three. But, you know, Juan Gaston, again, like I can see it now. Like he'll be stretching before a game and people are like, whoa, this dude is like, looks like he's been doing yoga for years.
I saw him one time steal a pass on a fast break, and he had a breakaway dunk during a basketball game, and I just thought people this size should not be able to move this way.
Yeah, and you know, we mentioned like that 9 Lives club with him, and like Cam Williams is the comp. You know, he's way better put together than Cam Williams. Like Cam Williams played basketball as well. Like he was a 2-foot jumper. Juan Gaston will sometimes be a 1-foot jumper. The other thing, Cam Williams was like a 1-year starter. Had like 16 holding penalties, led the SEC for offensive linemen. And like, again, he's like still getting these opportunities. I think Juan Gaston is one of those rare, you know, genetic mysteries where like he is going to continue to get every chance to get it right.
For sure. So I feel like another thing that kind of needs a rebrand is the concept of a 3-star, because everyone talks about 3 stars like it's the worst thing in the world. It's like you're in the top, you know, X%. You would know better than me statistically, like what percentage point that puts you in being a 3-star. But there's a lot of really talented football players that end up having to be 3 stars just because of the nature of the business. And I kind of wanted to take a historical look for a second. Like there's a couple of guys that are going to be playing at Georgia this year. And I'm just looking at the guys since you came on as director of scouting in for the 2022 class. But Dylan Bell, Jamal Merriweather, Kyron Jones, Drew Bobo, Cole Spear, Quintavious Johnson, Sokovie White, Chauncey Bowens. Are there any of those guys that I think will be productive for Georgia this year that you think could have been not a 3-star?
Yeah, the one I was actually doing some prep for a signing day show we got coming up, and we're looking forward. And to me, the one it's like I could see this guy just being a pest is Scovie White. And I know you're a big fan of him. And what's funny is Scovie White, I think it was before his junior year, he was down at the National Combine in San Antonio. And like he was the offensive MVP that day, like just won rep after rep and one-on-ones, like torched every defensive back there. And this is one of like the biggest events of the year. I mean, we're talking like 1,000 kids inside the Alamo Dome. And I don't think he had a single scholarship offer at the time. And the knock on Scovie White is like he is just small.
Yep.
But I think the X factor for him, aside from like kind of that like explosive tendencies, is he is just like a competitor. Like he just competes. So like to me, you kind of dig into like the projected kind of depth chart for Georgia. All right, this guy, could be taking some steps forward. Like, yeah, I could see him, kind of creating some magic in the SEC and, maybe potentially working his way into that NFL draft conversation. I think the biggest thing with him is going to be the size, but he's got the heart of a lion. So that's certainly one. Quintavious Jackson, you said as well?
Yeah, Quintavious Johnson, which I think we saw him play together.
Yeah, he's one where it's like, kind of like that edge position where it's just like such late blooming. And like, yeah, you could have certainly made a case where you should have been a 4-star prospect, like playing quarterback at times as a senior. Like it was easy to see what he could be. And then I would have to like go through our list and see like, all right, what edges did we take a chance on him? But you're right. Like normally, like if you see a 3-star 89 grade, like there has been multiple conversations about like making this player a 4-star. Like it's as good as a 4-star for us. And it's like, all right, so we have the top 247, and then we're going to have an additional, I'm trying to do 153 4-stars every cycle. So we have 40 total blue chippers, meaning 5 stars and 4 stars. Like at some point you have to protect a 4-star designation, right? Like at some point you got to do it. So those are even more difficult decisions, but like, much like I said, how our rankings are improving, like I think we are getting more and more dialed really when you look like 300 to 600, like those rankings I think are going to be so much better just because how we have it set up now. Like we're striving to like really separate ourselves in that area.
A little more historical trivia for you. I've got a question to see how well you know. So you've been the director of scouting since the end of the 2022 cycle. Do you know how many 5-stars have signed with Georgia in that span?
When they just signed 4, tied for the most. I would guess like 15.
That's a pretty good guess. 17, including the 4 that they just signed. And I'm curious to know, is there anyone in particular? It doesn't have to be a 5-star, actually, but looking back at the history of the guys that Georgia signed, is there anyone that you're proud of how right you were about them?
I think Chris Cole is going to break out. Yeah. I don't know where Dogs 247 stands on.
He's a fan favorite. Yeah, everyone's excited about him.
Yeah, and it's great because that photo I mentioned, like Georgia's social media put it out. I just saw it. I'm like, whoa, who's this? And it's like Chris Cole. So I sent it to our scouting team. And then someone pulled up like all the text messages of when I had went to see Chris Cole in Baltimore at the Under Armour camp. Like he was a 3-star prospect then. And then like the next update into the top 247. And then we just kept pushing him up the board. And, he's a really good kind of, I think, lesson for us. Because I was all on board with the athlete, but I'm like, dude, this kid he can't see it. Like he cannot see it. And like, is he going to be able to figure it out at the next level? And it's like, yeah, he's figuring it out. And linebacker is such an instinctive position, but as the season progressed, I mean, he was utilized more and more. I mean, he's absolutely, like Demarion Overshawn was like the comp I had for him, who's now with the Dallas Cowboys, and he's been dinged up. But yeah, that is one I feel really, really good about. There's some guys where I'm like hoping like, hey, can we figure it out here? Like Jordan Hall, like he'd be one where it's like, we need you to get it together, man. Like we need you to get it together.
That was actually going to be my next question. Is like on the flip side of that, it doesn't have to be a Georgia guy. I know you mentioned DJU earlier is one that sounds like it weighs on the group a little bit, but is there anyone in particular where you were surprised that they just didn't work out the way you were expecting them to?
Well, I think you also got to understand, it's like, all right, we're projecting 16, 17, 18-year-olds to like what's going to happen over the next couple of years. And like, we don't get like sit down interviews with these guys and like the opportunity to like see how they're wired. And if you think like the NFL does, right? Like they get these interviews, they can bring them in their facility. So, that's an area where we are trying to find ways to improve, is like the vetting of these individuals. And we're only going to get like a snapshot, like, just in a drive-by of who these individuals are, which is why like I'm always so concerned about being like, oh, this guy's a great kid, or like, I love the way this kid's wired, because it's like, I don't know, like 3 years from now, he'd be getting arrested. And it's like, I don't want to look like, an idiot. So like, yeah, I mean, you go back to, I think our 2024 cycle, like I think those 5 stars, it might be kind of our best run to date. The one that I'm panicking about, Williams Nwaneri, he's a 5-star signed with Missouri. Now he's going to Nebraska. You never like to see a guy changing schools that fast, very kind of concerned about him. Micah Hudson was at Texas Tech. Now he's going to Texas A&M. Don't really know what's going on there. And to be honest, like Micah Hudson, out of all the 5 stars last cycle, was like the one I was kind of like, I don't know if I see it. And again, it's like it's a group thing, and it's so much easier to say now, but I never felt like super convicted about that individual. So, those are some, like Cormani McLean, obviously was at Colorado. Now he's at Florida. I will say I had a pretty big smile on my face when he had his pick 6 against Kentucky, because, he has the natural talent. I think it's just been a buy-in thing with him. So those are some off the top of my head, like that just jump out to me.
Do you have player comps readily available for like everyone?
Well,
the reason I was going to ask that is because we had someone ask us a question about the receiver player comps that Georgia signed. I was just curious with like CJ Wiley, Talon Taylor, Landon Roldan, Tyler Williams, and Thomas Blackshear, if you had player comps or if that's not even something you do for everyone.
So, yeah, I mean, we're trying to do that more because obviously we do like a lot of different media stuff, and, everyone loves player comps. My issue with like player comps is, most people reject them. Like, it's like, no, he's better than that. Or now you're comparing this guy to an all-pro. So we're trying to like get more and more. I'm pulling up kind of our back end, and there's an area, and sometimes I'll punch him in there. So Tyler Williams, I said Javon Baker, who was at UCF. That. Yeah, that was my one for him. I mean, the Landon rolled on. I mean, that's an easy one. Like everyone's just.
Do you have a non-white comparison for him, or is it going to be Ladd McConkey?
Yeah, I mean it's Ladd. It's Ladd. Talon Taylor, I'm going through. Let's see if I wrote anything down there. He's kind of been one where, he's only 173 pounds. He's the only guy we could not measure at the All-American Bowl because he showed up late. And I'm like, I tried to drag him into our room, and like that just. They were not having it. But like, and I bring that up because you get around him and he's like this wiry individual, he could very well be 200 pounds in the next couple of years. So I've struggled to find one with him. I've struggled to find one with CJ Wiley. So to answer your question, no, I mean, there's other guys in the class that I would have some from, but I just don't have one for.
I like Tyler Williams and Javon Baker though. That's one that I know you've gotten a little bit more exposure to him probably than I have, just from where he's from, and I was curious what you thought of him.
And he's like another one where it was like, dude, he could have absolutely been a 4-star prospect for us. Like there was that conversation, and I think really the wide receiver position is like another, like that might be the hardest one to stack. Like there's just this huge volume of players, right? And it's like, all right, you're only going to have 64 stars. Like you can't have 104-star wide receivers. So I think a lot of fans or readers, they look and they're like, whoa, this guy's wide receiver 54. There's no way there's 53 wide receivers in front of him. And it's like, all right, like number one, if you want to watch all 53 wide receivers, that's going to take you about a week. Number two, like, there's like a bunch of data points that are going into this in terms of like what we are trying to value. And a lot of times, like, our group will get together and we'll have this like pool of 4 wide receivers. And it's like, dude, everyone's going to have a different flavor for what they like at the wide receiver position. So it's like, how do we figure out, all right, what's the one we're going to ride with in this instance? And, there's a ton of 3-star wide receivers in the class of 25 that are going to be selected in the NFL draft, right? And there's going to be 4 stars that don't pan out. That is certainly a position where I think it's hard to kind of differentiate, and you can get them in the neighborhood, but then once you sort them, it gets really hard.
Totally. I know we spent so much time. I know that you have more important shows to get on to than this one at some point as well. I did have a couple last items I wanted to touch on. We haven't talked about the 2026 class at all, and I know that your focus has been so much on the 2025 class that I don't want to hold your feet to the fire on any evals yet, because I know there's a lot of adjustments and things like that are going to happen throughout the year. But Georgia has 5 commitments: Zach Fort, Vance Spafford, Lincoln Keys, Jontavius Wyman, and out of JUCO, 7 Cloud. I'll leave it relatively open-ended. Is there anyone in particular that stands out to you from that group?
Yeah, the Zach Fort one, interesting to me, that he kind of jumped in the boat, right? Very instinctive safety. So what I just mentioned with like Rayshawn Dinkins, I think with him, I believe first ever freshman captain at IMG Academy, which is kind of like a big deal there. Saw him. He was at the Under Armour game, right? I wonder about like the true athletic upside on him. Like, he's never really tested well, but for what he is, like, he will come down and he will thump people. Like there's some Jonel Aguero there, and then it's like, all right, how big is he going to get? Like, I think that is something that starts to creep into your mind. But for Georgia at this stage, it's certainly a take that makes sense, right? And there was a ton of schools that were in on him. Lincoln Keys, to me, I think he's like sitting 240. Like, he's been in
I think he's right at 247, if I'm not
mistaken. And to open it up to you, like, all right, here's what happens. Like, I just came up with a protocol with all these reclassifications, right? The reclassification stuff's like getting out of control, right? So
I was going to ask you about this.
Yeah. So if we pull a guy out, what we're doing right now is like the replacement just goes at 247 until we get to another update, right? Instead of trying to slot them there, then we got all these guys moving around. So Lincoln Keys, to me, he's someone that played mostly JV football as a sophomore. I think he got pulled up at the tail end of his season at Saline there up in Michigan, and was able to catch some passes from CJ Carr. But I loved what he did as a senior. Georgia gobbling him up early makes a ton of sense. I mean, that was a guy the Big Ten was going to be all over. He's someone that will rise in our rankings. And, I think the tight end class it's got more depth, in my opinion, at this stage right now, than the 24s, which were a little top heavy. And then the other one I'll touch on, 7 Cloud. I don't know where he is in our JUCO rankings right now.
He's number 1, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I've heard some buzz, and I don't dig into much junior college tape. I mean, I remember him in high school, and I've heard from some folks in Athens, like, they think this guy's an absolute dude. So, Georgia, again, getting him in like now, right? Getting him committed. It seems like he wants to be at Georgia. Like, if 7 Cloud popped up, hey, next December, everyone in the country is going to be trying to go after this guy because he's a premium position, right? And a guy that's going to have some college reps under his belt.
For sure. Awesome. Well, I did want to give you a chance to shout out the rest of the team. I know you're the DOS, but I know you got a great team. Who else deserves shout outs from the 24/7 Sports Scouting team? I know I talk to Hudson a lot because he's the Georgia guy, but who else?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Hudson Standish. I think he's a rising star in this space. And you're right. He's based in Texas. He's got Georgia. We try to get him there as much as we can. Live exposure, but he's watching Georgia high school football games every single night. He's certainly also steered like Juan Gaston all the way up to where we had him ranked. Cooper Patagna, Another just solid evaluator. I mean, that's a guy that came from the college side, helped build the rosters at Michigan and in Washington when they squared off for the playoff. We have Gabe Brooks, another just excellent. He's in Texas right there. You think about some of the guys Georgia's pulled out of Texas, and then Greg Biggins out on the West Coast. So that's kind of the group, and there's more all around. I mean, again, we're pulling information from wherever, but that's really the core group. And then, hey, I wanted to ask you a question before we get out of here. Do you feel like Georgia's trying to get more athletic at quarterback?
I do. Because we're running short on time, I wasn't going to get into the quarterback stuff, but I think it's pretty obvious looking at, what their decision to take Hezekiah Millender, flipping him from Boise State, I find pretty fascinating. I know you feel this way as well, that Ryan Montgomery, I know he's coming off the ACL injury, but he's maybe a little more athletic than people give him credit for when you turn on the basketball tape. And then you look at the 2026 class, the 2027 class, just go look at the offers that they've given out over the last few weeks. It really feels like there is a concerted effort to find a new skill set at the quarterback position. Yeah.
Hey, and Puglisi, I dove back into my kind of notes on him this morning and offers value as a runner. He's not a statue in any way. I think he's part of that conversation. I don't know. It's just something that I've been keeping keeping an eye on. Right. They were involved with Camario Taylor a little bit, who ended up signing with Michigan State. You mentioned Hezekiah. I don't know who their guy is, or if they've really kind of circled and locked in on a guy in 2026, but Landon Duckworth to me is an interesting option. I don't know if you saw him running down the court and with the dunk the other week. I was like, whoa, okay. Get him on the freaks list there. I don't know, something that I've been keeping an eye on. And the other thing that jumps out to me, you mentioned Hezekiah Millender. Who's the kid from Northern Illinois that they took as well?
Daniel Okonkwo.
Yeah. Are these full scholarship guys or what are they doing there?
They're getting creative with some things. I won't say exactly which specific players, but I know there's 3 to 4 guys in this class where they're getting creative, and the NIL space allows you to sort of handle things a little bit differently, where I think guys can feel compensated without being on scholarship.
Yeah. And to me, it's just man, Georgia's just getting super creative, right? Super thinking outside the box, and we'll see who else copies them, but just kind of going through these signing classes, they're the only ones that are doing it. It's just they are ahead of the curve. And I've heard some rumors that potentially split scholarships could become a thing with the NCAA, and it's man, Georgia, to little surprise, taking advantage, trying to find the next Dan Jackson. I love it.
Yeah, they're always trying to find new ways to make me keep up with new approaches to how they handle scholarship counts and things like that. But I know I kept you 20 minutes longer than we were planning on. That's how great you were. So I really do appreciate you coming on to talk some ball. I think that everyone listening's probably learned a lot about your process, what they can expect from Georgia this year, looking into the future. I will say you are officially part of the Wolk mob, which basically means when I want you to come on the show, you've got to come on the show. And that's I guess I'll let you negotiate that a little if you want, but everyone's going to love having you on.
One of the best show names, I think, in the network. I appreciate you having me on, bud. Hopefully you're down in Florida at some camps and we can hit the links. Looking forward to it.
Are you going to be up in Atlanta this weekend for the Under Armour?
I'm on the bench. I'm on the bench. I got to go to Nashville. And then I got a little 2-month-old at home, so it's been a lot of travel. So I'm not at Nashville or at Atlanta, but Hudson and Cooper will be there. I'll be following along. I'll be in the thread.
We'll hold it down for you. Obviously, enjoy the dad life. I know that you got a lot of that going on right now, and looking forward to the next time that we have you on.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you. Jordan. All right, Jordan. 50 very solid minutes from Andrew Ivins. Always someone that I appreciate having on. Not the last time that we'll have him on this show by any means. What stood out to you from that conversation?
Well, one, he shouted out the podcast name. So, that had to be the biggest takeaway. But no, I really appreciate, and we've talked about this before, whether it's Andrew or some of the other people we talk to, when it comes to these ratings, there's a method to the madness. As much as people get frustrated with so-and-so is a 4-star when he should be a 5-star or whatever, they have really thought this thing out. Some of the other things that stood out to me, him talking about how much he likes this offensive tackle class, and him talking about, Dennis getting that bump and them being really mindful of trying to get, some more 4-star offensive tackles, that they really liked what they saw in the 2025 class as a whole. Something else he said, talking about the times they've missed on guys, I think that fans have come around, or at least, some of the more, reasonable fans have started to look at some of the 4-star, 5-stars, guys who we would consider bust, and kind of look at it like we've started to look at quarterbacks in the NFL draft, where, it seems like we've kind of swayed to the other side of like, okay, let's not necessarily call Justin Fields a bust because he landed with the Bears and it's about the organization, stuff like that. I think that needs to be taken into account when you look at certain recruits who don't pan out. Who were the coaches they were working with? What was the talent around them? You just don't ever know, as Andrew pointed out there. I mean, these are 17, 18-year-old kids. It's going to be an adjustment, but you have to consider, them having any growing spurts, what's going on in their personal life. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that, I wrote about this when Malachi Starks was a freshman because everybody was so excited. And I was like, it's so easy to look at these guys as guys in Madden, video game players. And it's like, video game characters. It's like, it's not that simple. Malachi, and he wound up being so good, but I made the point of like, he's going to have bad games. He's going to have bad days at practice where we hear Kirby on the mic getting after him. Like there's going to be those times that things don't go well. And I think sometimes you kind of get caught up in, oh, well, we look at this guy as a 5-star. He's unstoppable, that sort of thing. And the only other thing I would point out is got a good laugh of him talking about Bryce Underwood and the Michigan fans. Like, man, you got the number one player in the country and it's still not enough. But if that doesn't sum up college football fans as a whole, I'm not sure what does.
Oh, yeah, I knew I had to throw in some of the why do you hate these guys on George's list board or questions because, I asked our board, what questions do you have for Ivins? I think the first 3 questions were about Ethan Barbour not being in the top 24/7, so had to get it in there. Appreciate everyone who listened to that interview. I've said this before, I'll say it again. I am calling on the audience to reach out to us for people that you want us to interview. I mean, we obviously are going to take a look at Georgia commits, Georgia signees. I think that the next show that we do, one of Georgia's signees that did not early enroll will likely be the guest for that show. We'll have people within our 24/7 Sports Network that I'd love to have on the show, but I want to be proactive in getting new, fresh blood on the show, learning different perspectives. And I think that it's most important that y'all, the audience, sort of determine who those people are going to be. So do not hesitate to reach out to us on social in the comment section at Dogs247. All right, segment time, Jordan. We're going to start with arrow pointing up. I'm going to toss it to you. Whose arrow is pointing up?
I'm going to start and say that trades are, I give that the arrow pointing up. I don't know what your experience was with the all the stuff going on with the Mavs and making that trade. But what was your reaction when all that went down? Because I saw it on my phone and I was just like, oh, this is fake. Like I saw it on Instagram the morning after it happened. I was like, oh, this is not a real trade. And then very quickly I was like, oh my God, this is a real trade.
Yeah, so for anybody that's so tuned into college football recruiting that you haven't come out from under your college football recruiting rock, Luka Doncic was traded from the Mavs to the Lakers for Anthony Davis and a variety of picks and other less notable players. For some perspective, I mean, I have long been I'm a big Hawks fan. I interned for the Hawks when I was in college. I've been a supporter of Trae Young, maybe even against my better judgment at times, defending him very staunchly publicly. I have also been I wouldn't say a Luka Doncic hater, but I have attempted to, sort of soften how great of a player he is to make myself feel better for some of the draft day decisions that the Hawks made. So I've long been in the, let's see this thing play out. Nobody's guaranteed to win championships with these guys. I somehow fell asleep before this news ended up dropping, and I woke up the next morning and I could not believe of all people, I mean, my phone blew up because everybody knows what, in my personal life knows what my stance is on Luka Doncic and Trae Young and all of that has been. And I couldn't believe it. So I actually found out I thought somebody in my family had died or something because of how many text messages I had. No, it just turned out that Luka Doncic was getting traded, and various people were either trying to justify it or maybe they were validating my opinion on things. It didn't matter, but I've determined the Hawks officially won the draft day trade. So that's my stance on your arrow pointing up.
Yeah, with Luca getting moved, the funny thing is that I'm not a night owl, so like of course it happened and I didn't catch any of it, but I did appreciate the next day some of my group chats, a few that feature Mavericks fans, trying to kind of follow everything going on. I did want to share the screen with some of the other trades that have gone on. Someone said, just imagine showing this graphic to someone last year, and for those who are listening to this, you've got Anthony Davis, you got Luka, you got Jimmy Butler going to Golden State. And someone shared this tweet and was like, this is like one of those really bad thumbnails that you see on YouTube when people are like, what if the NBA just started over? And it's like, it was so wild. Very much enjoyed all the discourse about it. And
a quick Stay Wolk on that. And maybe this is a segment we might need to incorporate into this show at some point as well. But I mean, you have to, everyone says, how can you do this? The Mavericks got fleas, X, Y, and Z. Like, nobody has had more exposure to Luka Doncic than the Dallas Mavericks. I think you have to ask the question, what do the Mavericks know? Insert Brian Windhorst meme. What's going on? What do the Dallas Mavericks know? And what are their opinions on Luka Doncic that may be more valid than a lot of the general public has led on over the last few hours? That's just my quick Stay Woke, me inserting my very blatant biases on this situation into the conversation.
Only other arrow pointing out I have Mama Ning's Thai restaurant in Watkinsville. While we were listening to that interview with Andrew Ivins, that was my dinner. So shout out to Mama Ning's, very good Thai food. It made for a good meal while we were listening to Andrew talk.
Won't be the last time that we have a food reference, probably, as an arrow pointing up. On my end, I'm going with two different seasons, arrow pointing up. I've got one golf season. The weather, I think it's a fake spring that we've got going on right now. I know you and I are going to try and get out on the links tomorrow. Not saying where, so that we don't have any hecklers while we're out there shooting our 95s, 100s, whatever it is that we end up shooting. But excited to get back out on the course. Right time, right season. Also, camp season. Andrew Ivins mentioned it during the interview. I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier. The UA Atlanta camp, Under Armour Atlanta camp, is this Sunday. It's going to give me an opportunity to see some guys in person that I haven't seen a whole lot of. Andrew mentioned quarterback Landon Duckworth in the 2026 class. He's supposed to be at that camp. Carson Baker, Xavier Crowell, Jay Lamar, Kavion Conciaro, Peyton Dyer, Ryan Mosley, Caden Prothrow, a bunch of guys that we've talked about over these last few junior days, a bunch of guys that we will be continuing to talk about as it relates to official visits. Stay locked into Dogs 24/7 because we're going to have plenty of recruiting updates and news and commentary coming out of that Under Armour Atlanta camp on Sunday.
We'll just also say, too, because we talked about it in the very first Stay Wolk, went to my first Rock Lobsters game. Ben, you need to get on board. It was a good time. They beat Baton Rouge. Couple fights. I think the Rock Lobsters scored 3 goals. They won the game. It was a good time. I highly encourage it.
I need to get over there. I also need to get some Rock Lobsters gear as well. I'll definitely buy a sweatshirt or something like that while I'm over there. All right. The much anticipated segment of the show, probably Predict a Commit, where Jordan Hill and I try and predict who we think is going to wind up in Georgia's class. I know that we've got a graphic handy from our previous predictions. I think that on my end, it was Buford offensive lineman Graham Houston, safety Zach Fort, which I've got a question for you here in a second. On your end, you've got Shamadan Madonna Prep, running back Derek Cooper, as well as Grayson linebacker Tyler Atkinson. I've been living with some guilt over the last show. I mean, we do the Predict a Commit segment live. I may or may not have had some inside scoop on what was going on behind the scenes, so that by the time that the show was ending and before we were ever going to be able to actually run the podcast, the news was always already going to be live. So we had breaking news going on at the end of that show. If you were listening in podcast form last time, you felt that recruiting time traveling experience go on. 2 questions. 1, should I feel guilt?
No, not at all. No.
Okay, and then 2, perhaps the more important question here. The segment's called Predict a Commit. And it had me thinking because, technically I should be patting myself on the back, right? We got Zach Fort. I got my first Predict a Commit right of the cycle, and it's called Predict a Commit. But I guess the question is, and I don't know, I kind of give you the authority to make the decision on this, or maybe listeners will give us their feedback on it as well. But do we give ourselves credit when we get a commit right, or is this about who signs with Georgia in December?
I think we stick with the name because I like Predict a Commit, and I think it even plays into just how crazy this could wind up being. I mean, just how recruiting goes, because I guarantee you, Ben, I'm not going to get very many in this game. If a guy flips, hey, I still said he was going to – I didn't say he was going to sign with Georgia. I said he was going to commit to Georgia. So, no, I say it's just Predict a Commit. It rolls off the tongue. I like it. I think we stick with that.
All right, good. So because that way now I can officially give myself a pat on the back. That is by no way me suggesting that I'm not expecting Zach Fort to sign with Georgia in December. Just saying, crazier things have happened. You never know how this goes. So without further ado, let's dive into our Predict a Commit for this episode. I'm actually going to start this time around, and I'm going to go with a position group that we've talked about, and I think that they are going to shoot for the stars at. And you've already taken one of those stars in your class, but I just think that this is someone in-state Georgia offered, had a really great junior season, and I'm going with Colquitt County running back Jay Lamar. He has an official visit scheduled May 30th to June 1st. I really am a fan of this guy's game. Another person that I am going to see at the Under Armour Atlanta camp in Carrollton on Sunday. Someone that I expect to see a rankings boost for once, like I just mentioned in that conversation with Andrew Ivins, they have a lot of homework that they're going to start doing on the 2026 recruiting class. This is someone that I know is very highly thought of in Athens. And yeah, I'm going out and saying Georgia, I think we'll sign 2 or 3 running backs in this class, and I'm putting my name behind it. I think that Jay Lamar will be one of them.
I like it a lot. I think that it's a position of need, as we've talked about quite a bit with Georgia, and I think that it makes a lot of sense. I think it's a position they've got to get more depth with. They've got to fill some big holes. I think that one makes a lot of sense.
All right, who you got?
All right, I really thought that this is who you were about to call out, but I'll pull him up for those watching. I'm going with Carter Lucky. He's a guy that I thought about with the last Predict a Commit. I think that you consider the family ties to Georgia, obviously his brother there at this point. I think he's a really interesting prospect, 6'5", 265. Going to have his share of opportunities, going to have a whole lot of schools looking at him, and you just consider him at Norcross. That's one of the top programs in the state. He's going to have no shortage of teams looking at him and teams that are going to be interested in bringing him in. I'll pull up some of the photos. There's one that Ben took.
There you go. Great shot right there. I think that's a great pick. He was 100% in consideration for me. Because we've been preparing for this segment a little bit more, I feel a little bit more, pressure when it comes to picking making smart picks, making sensible picks at certain points in the cycle. And I asked around a few folks, like, who do you think would be some smart options to select over the next couple of weeks? I think Carter Lucky came up on just about every single list that I asked about. So I think that's a great pick and very close ties to Georgia. I'm about to pull a plot twist on you, Jordan. I'm not sure that we're going to do a Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show episode next week. And whether we do or not, I started to realize, I want us to have even more names on these Predict a Commit lists. So, we're picking 2 commitments today. I don't know if you have anybody prepared or not. I don't care whether you have anybody prepared or not. I'm going to let you go first on this one. We're picking 2 commits today. Go ahead.
This is why you do this like a draft board, because especially a lot of the times when we start recording these, I don't know if Ben's going to take the first pick or if I am. So I don't ever want to be on this live going, he just took my guy. But I was ready for this one. And this one, I'll credit Lincoln Keys, because listening to that interview on the last episode, he talked about this guy quite a bit and said, yeah, I'm working hard to get him to follow me to Athens. Going Mark Bowman. I think that Georgia is going to go get another tight end. I think that number 1 tight end in the country. Mater Dei has been really good to Georgia. They've done a very good job of recruiting that high school. He's going to have his fair share of opportunities as the top tight end, as a 5-star composite tight end. But I think Mark Bowman's the guy. I'm always going to make reference or jokes to the MLB writer that covers the Atlanta Braves. But I think there is room in the state of Georgia for 2 Mark Bowmans. I think he winds up being a Bulldog.
I'm stunned right now. This was going to be my second pick of the day. I'm the one that pulled the plot twist, and then you somehow pulled the rug out from under me under my own plot twist. This is where draft board construction is important, because my guess is you were not going to take Jay Lamar with either of your picks. If I were to guess, you've already taken Derek Cooper. You don't need to take an extra shot at a running back. I should have taken Mark Bowman with my first pick, and I would have had Jay Lamar. But you know what? That's a great pick, and I like a lot of the reasonings that you had behind it.
And the funny thing is, I picked Carter Lucky first because I was like, Ben very well may pick Carter Lucky. So I thought there was a chance Mark Bowman might be on your board, but I was like, Carter, if I don't get him, he may not be around by the time I get another pick.
I thought with the reclassification, I might have a few more episodes before I was going to have to pick Mark Bowman. But
you got to get up pretty early to get one over on old Jordan Hill.
Yeah, I sure do. All right. Well, I'm going to go with someone that I actually considered using on my very first predict to commit on the first episode. And I was debating between 2 guys at a similar position. And I think there's a great chance that Georgia signs both of these, but I feel like there's a really good chance that Georgia is going to sign at least one of Graham Houston or Desmond Green. And so an offensive lineman from South Carolina, I've mentioned this in some of my recruiting notebooks. Like when you look at his recruiting profile, lower tier 3-star offensive lineman from South Carolina, you don't hear a whole lot about him. You see this dude in person and you immediately say, holy smokes, this is why Georgia likes him. He's a big physical freak of nature. I know really dating back to last spring game for the G-Day is when he really got on my radar as someone that I thought there was serious mutual interest with between Georgia and Desmond Green. As of right now, he only has, when I was talking to him and his dad earlier this week, he had 1 official visit scheduled, and it was to Georgia May 30th to July 1st, or May 30th to June 1st. May 30th to July 1st would be one hell of an official visit. But
I'm gonna go ahead and put in my crystal ball if that's
you're officially visiting for a month and a half. I think that you're going there, but that first weekend of June, he's going to be there. Another guy, you brought up Carter Lucky. Those are 2 guys that are going to actually, now that I think about it, Carter Lucky, Jay Lamar, and Desmond Green, all 3 that May 30th to June 1st official visit weekend, things that make you say, a little bit. Makes you say, a little bit. But I really like Desmond Green. I think that he is going to shoot up in the rankings. I don't think it matters whether he does or not. I know that Georgia loves this guy, and I know there's a lot of mutual respect there between Kirby Smart, Stacey Searles, and the Green family. So I'm trying to build some trenches up front. I've got Graham Houston. Now I've got Desmond Green. I think both of those guys can hold down the interior offensive line of the future for Georgia.
Ben, I hate to pat you on the back so much, but I had 3 names for the predict to commit just to be ready. Carter Lucky, Mark Bowman, Desmond Green was the 3rd guy I had. So I was loaded up. So that makes me feel better because the expert had him on the list. He was the other option if one of my other guys got sniped.
Well, that just goes to show I'm glad I've got Jay Lamar on my team. Let's put it that way. But I feel like I maybe could have gotten some more value at him. I make the rules, so I could have picked first next episode. I probably could have just gotten him next episode, but neither here nor there. Great picks from you. Carter Lucky and Mark Bowman would not shock me whatsoever if both of those two guys are in Georgia's class. In fact, just tipping to the end of the month when I think my first mock class will come out, I think that both of those predicted commits that you just had will be in my class as well. So I think we might go 4 for 4 in the first mock class 1.0 of guys that we just picked in this episode for the predicted commit segment. All right, great episode. Got into a lot from a junior day standpoint. Closing the book on the class of 2025. That said, like I said, I think next episode our special guest will be from the class of 2025, and it also had me thinking maybe there's some other guys in the class of 2025 that haven't enrolled yet that I'd also like to be able to try and get on the show. So that's just some food for thought. I'll be at the Under Armour camp at Carrollton High School on Sunday. There will be plenty of coverage from Dogs 24/7 on that. Huge basketball game on Saturday. I don't want to call it a must win because it wouldn't be a bad loss, but it would be a really, really important win if they're able to get it. I think it might be a quad 2 game at this exact point in time too, so you almost really want to win it. But all that said, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, like, subscribe, follow us on Twitter at Dogs247, follow us on Facebook, download on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. We really appreciate everyone for tuning in for this episode and the previous episodes. For Jordan Hill, I'm your host, Ben Wolk. And until next time, this is the Stay Wolk UGA Recruiting Show.